The sun dipped below the horizon, shadows stretched long over the town square. It was Memorial Day, a day for remembrance, but in the heart of Hollow Creek, a deeper unease settled. The air, thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and lilies, held a chill. It clung to the back of Sarah's throat like cobwebs. "You sure you're all right, Sarah?" John asked, his brow furrowed with concern. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers brushing against hers. "You seem a mite spooked." Sarah managed a shaky smile. "It's nothing, John, just thinking about Grandpa, you know. He always hated this day." John nodded, his gaze drifting towards the statue of the lone soldier that stood sentinel in the town square. The ceremony was brief, the silence punctuated by the mournful cry of a distant train whistle. The mayor's voice, thick with emotion, resonated through the square. He spoke of courage, of sacrifice, of the enduring human spirit, but his words seemed to drift past Sarah, carried away on the wind. She couldn't focus, not with that feeling of unease clinging to her. As the last notes of taps faded into the twilight, Sarah felt a cold spot on her arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, clutching John's arm. John frowned. "Hear what, Sarah?" "A whisper," she said, her voice barely audible. "Someone's here, John. I can feel it." John squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It's just the wind, Sarah. Come on, let's get you home." He led her away from the square, his grip on her hand firm and reassuring. As they walked, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the shadows. The drive home was tense. Sarah sat huddled in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the dark road ahead. The headlights cut through the gloom, momentarily illuminating the trees that lined the road. Each tree, with its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, seemed to take on a menacing quality in the fading light. "Want me to put the radio on?" John asked, his voice a welcome intrusion in the silence. "No, it's okay, just keep driving." They were halfway home when Sarah saw him. A figure standing on the side of the road, silhouetted against the headlights of an oncoming car. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in what looked like an old military uniform. As the car approached, he raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "John, did you see that?" John, his eyes fixed on the road, frowned. "See what, Sarah? There was a man, standing by the road. He saluted us." John glanced at her, his brow furrowed with concern. "There was no one there, Sarah. You're just tired." But Sarah knew what she had seen. It was a fleeting glimpse, a flicker in the darkness. But it was enough to send a shiver down her spine and leave her with a chilling certainty. They were not alone. Back home, the silence was deafening. John, after making sure Sarah was settled in with a cup of chamomile tea, went to check on the generator. The storm the previous night had knocked out the power, plunging their little farmhouse into darkness. Sarah sat curled up on the couch, a blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. Her mind raced, replaying the events of the evening over and over again. She couldn't shake the image of the soldier saluting from the side of the road. The way he stood so straight and tall, a look of profound sadness etched on his face. It was as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. John found her like that, lost in thought, her tea growing cold in her hands. "You okay, Sarah? You've been awfully quiet." Sarah hesitated, then decided to tell him about the letter. The letter her grandfather, a veteran of World War II, had started writing but never finished. The letter addressed to a fallen comrade, a young man named Thomas. The next day, Sarah convinced John to drive her to Gettysburg. She had always wanted to visit the historic battlefield, to pay her respects to the thousands of soldiers who had lost their lives there. But this time, it was different. This time, she felt drawn to the place, compelled to go. The air hung heavy over the vast battlefield, thick with the weight of history and sorrow. A palpable sadness permeated the very ground beneath their feet. Sarah could almost hear the clash of swords, the deafening roar of cannons, the anguished cries of the fallen. "So many lives lost," John said, placing a hand on Sarah's back. They walked hand in hand through the meticulously maintained grounds, stopping to read the inscriptions on the countless headstones. Each stone represented a life cut short, a story left untold. As they stood on Little Round Top, gazing out over the vast expanse of the battlefield, Sarah thought she saw him again. The soldier from the road, standing on the crest of a hill, a lone figure silhouetted against the setting sun. The car ride back to Hollow Creek was filled with a strange mix of dread and anticipation. Dread because Sarah knew that whatever was happening, it wasn't over. Anticipation because she felt like she was getting closer to the truth. "Something's following us, John," she said. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that unseen eyes were following their every move. John, though skeptical, couldn't deny the fear in Sarah's voice. "We'll figure it out, Sarah, we always do." As they drove, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn back to the town square, to the statue of the lone soldier. It was as if something there held the key to unraveling the mystery that had descended upon their lives. Back in the quiet confines of their home, Sarah found herself drawn to the attic. It was there, amongst her grandfather's belongings, that she discovered a dusty old journal. The journal entries were vivid and haunting. Thomas wrote with a raw honesty that both terrified and captivated Sarah. He wrote of the relentless bombardments, of the mud and blood that stained the trenches, of the constant fear that gnawed at the edges of his sanity. But he also wrote of the camaraderie, of the unwavering bonds of brotherhood forged in the crucible of war. "The dead are all around me. I can hear them moaning, calling my name. They reach for me with cold, lifeless hands. I fear I will soon join them." One entry in particular sent chills down Sarah's spine. In it, Thomas described a harrowing experience during the Battle of the Somme. He wrote of being separated from his unit during a fierce German counterattack, of finding himself alone and surrounded in the fog-shrouded no-man's land. As Sarah read those words, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She gasped, dropping the journal, as a wave of icy air washed over her. She was no longer alone in the attic. Standing beside her, his form flickering like a candle in the wind, was Thomas. Thomas's spectral form was as real as anything Sarah had ever seen. He was young, barely a man, with kind eyes that held centuries of sorrow. His uniform, torn and mud-stained, hung loosely on his emaciated frame. "Please, what do you need?" Sarah asked. He looked at Sarah, a plea in his eyes. "Help me find peace. Help me fulfill my promise." "What promise, Thomas?" "I made a promise to my friend William. He died in my arms, begging me to return a letter to his sweetheart back home. But I lost the letter in the chaos of battle. I have never been able to forgive myself." Sarah knew what she had to do. She had to help Thomas find peace. It was the only way to appease his restless spirit. She spent the next few days researching the history of Thomas's unit, painstakingly piecing together the events that led to his death. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Sarah convinced John to take her to Maine. The drive was long, but Sarah was determined. "I have to find Emily, have to deliver William's message and help Thomas find peace," Sarah said. She could feel his presence beside her, his spectral hand resting on hers, urging her forward. They found Emily in a nursing home, a frail but sharp-witted woman in her late 90s. She had never forgotten her beloved William, and tears welled up in her eyes as Sarah spoke of Thomas and his promise. "William always spoke so highly of you, Thomas. He loved you like a brother," Emily said. As Sarah spoke, she could feel Thomas's presence grow stronger. He was there, standing beside Emily, his spectral hand hovering over hers. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but he couldn't. He was trapped, bound to the mortal world by his unfulfilled promise. Sarah reached into her bag and carefully pulled out a faded piece of paper. It was the letter, the one William had entrusted to Thomas. "This is for you, Emily. This is William's letter," Sarah said. Emily took the letter with trembling hands, her eyes filled with a mixture of joy and sorrow. As she read the words, penned in William's familiar hand, a look of peace settled over her face. It was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. As Emily read, Sarah felt a shift in the atmosphere. The air, which had been heavy with sorrow and regret, began to lighten. "Thank you. You have given me the greatest gift. You have set me free," Thomas said. She turned to see Thomas, his spectral form glowing brightly, a look of pure joy on his face. Thomas faded away, his form dissolving into motes of light that swirled around Emily before disappearing. The room was silent, the only sound Emily's soft sobs as she clutched William's letter to her chest. In that moment, I understood the true meaning of Memorial Day, Sarah thought. It wasn't just about remembering the dead, it was about honoring their sacrifice, keeping their memory alive, and helping them find peace. As Sarah and John made the long drive back to Hollow Creek, the setting sun casting long shadows across the road, Sarah thought about all the soldiers who had died in wars past. She thought about their families, their loved ones, the ones they left behind, and she knew, with a certainty that came from deep within her soul, that they were never truly gone. They lived on in the hearts of those who remembered them, their stories whispered on the wind, their spirits finding solace in the love that endured long after they were gone. The experience left an indelible mark on Sarah. It taught her that the line between the living and the dead was thin indeed, and that sometimes all it took was a listening heart and a willingness to help to bridge the divide. She knew that she would never forget Thomas or William or any of the brave souls who had given their lives in service to their country. If these stories sent a chill down your spine, don't forget to like and share this video with your fellow horror aficionados. And we want to hear from you. Share your own Memorial Day horror stories in the comments below. And let's keep the spooky spirit alive. Thanks for watching, and remember, the darkness holds more secrets than we can imagine.